Hey everybody, I'm Christy Zito with the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance, and I am honored to be here today with Senator Scott Herndon from North Idaho District 1. District 1.
And I like to say I'm the only district in the state with an international border.
Oh, good point. And part of the reason I'm so excited to be here with Scott is he is a Second Amendment rock star. He's helping, totally involved, not just helping with the lawsuit that will be heard in the Idaho Supreme Court next month to preserve our preemption rights, meaning that no city, county, political subdivision below the state level can make any sort of gun law that will impede on your right to keep and bear arms, carry open and concealed on public-owned property. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today we are going to talk about red flag legislation and the anti-red flag gun law that Scott is going to sponsor this year. Now this is important because, as we all know, the Biden administration has appropriated by hook or by crook $750 million to dangle that big old carrot out in front of the states. In fact, it might even be a stick and not a carrot to enact these red flag laws. And then in the omnibus spending bill, there are more than one. I think I counted at least 5 different occasions in the omnibus spending bill where there is more money to push states to implement these red flag laws that do nothing more than disarm the honest, law-abiding citizen who wants to carry. So Scott, why don't you tell us about the bill that you're carrying? Tell us what effect it's going to have, what's wrong with our law now, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
Okay, so here's the key problem. Number one, Biden's president.
Okay, I'll agree with you there. That works.
Number two, the Congress is the facilitator of all of these bad policies.
Yeah, I'll give you that one too.
And frankly,
on both sides of the aisle.
That's it. And that's what I was going to say. It almost doesn't matter whether it's been the Democrats or the Republicans. There's danger coming from the federal government for Idaho freedom. And so that's what we're on the lookout for. And that's the problem. And then the way they manipulate the state of Idaho is through the money. And
do you think that there are legislators in Idaho who are a little bit hungry for that federal money?
I don't know if it's hungry, but here's what they always say, that if we don't take the federal money, someone else is going to take it.
Who cares? I would say to that, when that would come up in debate on the floor, if my kid comes home and tells me he's going to buy cocaine from the drug dealer on the corner, and I say, no, you're not. And he said, well, if I don't buy it, my friend Tommy's going to buy it, so I just as well have it. I'm saying that doesn't make it right.
It doesn't. And it's almost as if maybe they get threats from people in their district, like, if you don't take that money to enrich the district, then we lose that money and you're bad, and then they worry about losing office. I don't know what the motivation is, but I'll tell you what the effect is that in every federal program that has a big chunk of money attached to it, there are going to be shackles. That the state is going to have to do something as a condition of that money. And I say, for federal shekels, there are federal shackles. And it literally, we give away our sovereignty and our state authority every time we take that federal money to do some program. And this is how they're manipulating or attempting to manipulate the states on these red flag gun laws. So they're funding it from the federal level. And then they're using federal agencies and states' cooperation to basically take away gun rights before any conviction of a crime. And we saw this actually up in our district. And it was in Priest River. It was years ago. They did this through a federal agency. There was a guy named John Arnold. He was a vet, and they wanted to adjudicate him. Really not adjudicate him. It wasn't through due process at a court, but they basically said, look, you're becoming mentally incompetent, whether it was PTSD, age, or some other factor, and they were going to send a federal agency employee to come and take his guns away from the home because they thought that he was a danger to himself or to others based on his mental condition. But he had no day in court. He had no true due process.
No due process.
Where
That's
he gets
huge,
to be heard
huge.
and present evidence, and there's a presumption of innocence and a presumption that he has the right to legally own a firearm and to possess a firearm. And in that case, my own wife and my children were there at his house on a particular day when this federal agency employee was scheduled to arrive to do this thing, and other people from the county were there, and the federal agent never showed up.
So let me ask you just real quick. so this involves local law enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what is the duty of local law enforcement? Now, we talked about this and we reviewed a lot of this when we did SAPA a couple of years ago. And this bill that you have has some impact on that as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is the duty then of local law enforcement? And you can kind of tie that into the federal bribe money.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, particularly in this case, our sheriff, and when you talk about local law enforcement, we have two different agencies that we're typically talking about: city police departments, county sheriffs. I like the whole concept of county sheriffs because they are elected by the people of that municipality, that county, that local jurisdiction. They take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, but also the state of Idaho.
And who do they work for directly?
The people. And that's the key. And so their duty is to defend the people, to interpose. That's the word I like to use. It's interposition. And Sheriff Wheeler did do that in that situation. He actually went out to John Arnold's house. He was there that day with the people standing by his side, but he had the authority of local office, of state. It was a state delegated authority, a constitutional authority. The federal government, what they try to do is get local law enforcement, state law enforcement, local law enforcement, to participate in the enforcement of their unconstitutional actions. And what we're going to do is basically cut that off. We're going to bar the participation of state actors in cooperating with these federal actions or these attempts at federal action that deprive Idahoans of their constitutional rights, and particularly their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms.
Okay, so what happens then, and we hear this all the time, and I've been in situations where I've heard law enforcement, and this is not a bash at law enforcement at all, because, I mean, I'm grateful for what they do, and the good ones that take that oath and keep that promise that they make to uphold the Constitution. And we know, though, seriously, that constitutionally even, and it's been upheld by the Supreme Court, they don't have a duty to protect us.
Mm-hmm.
Their job is to investigate and detain and prosecute like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because they can't be everywhere. That first line of defense is ourselves, because they physically can't be everywhere. But sometimes we hear them say, well, I'm just doing my job. So what will happen, let's run a scenario that law enforcement shows up on my doorstep to seize my guns according to some federal law, and my local law enforcement agency is there with a federal agent assisting. What happens in that scenario after your bill gets passed?
So this is where you have to have what you just mentioned is when law enforcement says they're just doing their job, they have to understand what their actual job is. So a deputy sheriff working for the sheriff, his job is to uphold the rights of the people. And typically, if they don't understand that, it's an education issue. But clearly there has to be a penalty. In other words, there has to be an enforcement mechanism to protect the rights of the people. So the bill is going to create an enforcement mechanism where we're going to educate law enforcement, but then we're going to have essentially recourse for the citizens when law enforcement does not, basically, when they comply with the federal government against the constitutional rights of the people of Idaho.
All right, so Scott, then what is the penalty? What does this offer to the citizens of the state of Idaho to protect themselves from this massive amount of money that the Biden administration wants to throw at legislators to enact these red flag laws that totally usurp due process, totally do away with several sections of the federal Constitution? What does it offer the citizens, the gun owners?
Yeah, so here's the thing. We need to disincentivize law enforcement from participating in this, right? So there has to be a penalty. And so what we're looking at proposing right now is, number one, we need injunctive relief. So if a law enforcement agency in the state of Idaho is cooperating with the federal government on a red flag gun seizure, then we need to be able to go to a court in an emergency fashion and get immediate injunctive relief, where the court basically blocks, and this of course would be a state court, immediately blocks the action of the state actor, of the state or local actor, law enforcement. And so That can't happen without this legislation. We create a cause of action and the ability for a court to make an immediate finding and an enforcement order to block this execution of this red flag gun law, number one. Number two, to further disincentivize law enforcement, we create a right to damages. And so in this case, it's $250,000 potential liability of these local law enforcement state actors. So let's say it were a city and a city police officer, then the city is going to be liable for $250,000 of damages in the case where one of their police officers acts to illegally confiscate a gun from an Idaho citizen. And so then also attorney's fees, we create the right to get attorney fee compensation for that citizen who had to file this lawsuit.
That's huge, because it's easy to say, I'm going to take him to court or I'll go after him in court, but boy, that costs a lot of money, upfront money.
That's right. And so what this does is it guarantees if an attorney thinks this is a great case, he's going to be willing to take that on a contingency, knowing that there's a provision in state law that he's going to get paid if they prevail. And if he thinks they're going to prevail, boom, he knows he's going to get paid. So that's a big deal. And then the third thing is we need to there's a lot of what's called immunity of law enforcement. So when they act, they're acting in their official capacity. And there's no personal liability, and we need to create a personal liability. It's what we call immunity, and so we take away that immunity. Even though they're a state actor, we're going to hold them personally liable as well for the damages that are discovered and declared by the court, and that's going to disincentivize them personally to really. What it's going to do is it's going to incentivize them to really understand what the actual law is. What does the Constitution say?
No more of this, I was just doing as I was told.
Exactly. And make sure that when they're doing their duties, they are watching out for Idahoans' constitutional rights. That's what we need them to do.
Well, and that's exactly what we need them to do. Because, this is no joke, folks. Because what it'll do is when we no longer have our guns, when we no longer have the right to defend ourselves, then tyranny can run rampant. And we can say, well, that'll never happen in Idaho. But Scott just cited a situation where it does. And then here a few years ago, I don't remember, we'll just talk really briefly about Marcy's Law. That's a huge red flag thing. And more and more and more. Last year, I believe, or the year before, in the legislature, there was some legislation, where guns could be taken away from social media posts or different threats and stuff like that. And it all sounds good on the surface. But you have not committed a crime until you take action and there is evidence that you have done something wrong. And that has to be preserved, because that's the only thing that defines us living as free Americans and living under communism or Marxism or tyranny. So this legislation is really important, folks. And again, Second Amendment Alliance members have been on the forefront. You are the strongest grassroots organization in the state. You wield the power of tens of thousands of members who are ready at a phone call or an email or a text message to just bombard this Capitol with your messages. Get after your legislators. You've been effective before in making sure that those who will not support your gun rights do not return to this Capitol. And we will do it again, and we will continue to crush the opposition to all that is good and righteous when it comes to our gun rights. Because without them, we have nothing. We have no freedom. So join the Second Amendment Alliance. If you are already a member, then donate, contribute, help us with the lawsuit, help us here at the Capitol. But sign up for those emails and text messages so we can let you know what we need and when, and you can be just on the mark to respond to what Scott's going to need for your help. And encourage your representative to co-sponsor Scott's legislation. They don't have to wait for Scott to come to them, and I'm going to be here at the Capitol going around talking to them as well, but they can go to Scott. And that's even better, because then they are showing you that they have your back and that it's important to you, so it's important to them, and they will support you. So I want to thank you, Scott, for your time. Again, we'll be back at the Capitol to do this often. We're going to keep everybody informed what's going on here, how the battle's going, how hard Scott and everybody's working to make sure that your right to keep and bear arms, to defend yourself, and to live without fear is protected. Thank you, Scott. Anything you want to say?
You're welcome. I just want to say I look forward to some success this legislative session, and that success absolutely depends on the Second Amendment Alliance, gun owners that participate. Legislators respond to them. So we appreciate gun owners around Idaho because it super helps.
It does. Okay. Thank you again. God bless. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.